Hello, my name is Greg Massi, and this is episode number 43 of The Color of Air, a podcast about the musical journey. You could find us online at colorofair.com. We're on Twitter at The Color of Air. We're on Facebook at Color of Air Podcast, or you can email us, colorofairpodcast@gmail.com. Also, please check out retconindustries.com to keep up with all the different projects I'm involved in, my current discography, a blog which I just started called The Method Guitarist. As well, you can go to ballasette.bandcamp.com or link to it from retconindustries.com. On that site, you can check out the music I made with my band Ballasette, but also I released a new project called Daliad, which is an electronic ambient, new agey piano sort of project at the moment. But I did release one track so far called For When You Fall Apart, and you can check it out there. Please purchase and stream it. You can also stream Ballasette and Daliad and my Capital Wrestling themes on Spotify. And what else? Oh, and Concilium, of course. My main doom metal project at the moment, Concilium. We just released an EP last year, so you can find us at concilium.bandcamp.com. And also you can find Concilium on Spotify. So I think that takes care of all the links. Took a few tries to get all of them in there. So I've got a pretty cool guest for you today. It's a repeat guest, Nathanael Larochette. And I talked to him a while ago on the podcast about his solo project, Muskox. And during that original podcast, he did mention that he was involved with a band project called The Night Watch. And I can't remember how much we discussed. And, obviously I didn't go back and listen to the episode to double check that. But this conversation is primarily focused on The Night Watch. They just released a record at the end of last year called An Embarrassment of Riches. It's a concept record. It is expansive. It's for the number of musicians in the band. It's a huge sounding record. It's got lots of different cool vibes to it. Kind of goes in between some different genres, but not in an abrasive way. In a very, very natural, organic sounding way. And it was a really cool conversation where we got to cover the making of the record. And, in my research for this project, he had done a couple records with the Night Watch before that. So we touch on those a little bit. And, like any other Color of Air interview, we go off on a million different tangents. So, but, Nathanael was a really cool guest a few years ago. So I was happy and excited to have him back. Because he really is a talented musician and a swell guy, and I think you're really going to like this interview. But first, as always, let's introduce you to the music of The Night Watch, and this is the opening track from An Embarrassment of Riches, and this is called Land Ho!
me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I sincerely apologize for that.
Oh, no worries.
It was a mixture of, just work getting in the way, and then trying to upgrade, updates to Skype because I hadn't used it in a while.
Yeah, I haven't
So
used it since our last chat.
okay, okay. So yeah, and the recording software I used, updated to the most recent one, but the most recent one isn't compatible with my computer, so it was like trying to just do a bunch of.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry about
Oh yeah, yeah.
that.
Oh no, no, it's totally cool.
But thank you for reaching out to me to take, um, I'm glad when to get a chance to do this podcast more often, obviously. And I was pretty psyched to hear from you. And so, how have things been going?
Yeah, they've been good. I mean, the doing you're always kind of finding a balance of, getting some stuff to pay the bills and then just spending time creating. But I think that for me, just completing albums or completing projects is definitely how I kind of measure my my success. I don't
Yeah.
always measure it It's like I'm like tell my parents like, "Oh, I got this cool review on this site," and they're like, "Okay," and then I'm like, I have to like throw in kind of like, "Oh, like I made this much money at a gig," and they're like, "Oh, okay." But yeah, but it's cool. I mean, I guess we haven't chatted since I think we were chatting about Woodfall. Would have been
Yep.
the last time. So I've done a few records since then. Yeah, so that was 2014, and then 2016 I did the second Night Watch album, Boundaries, and then I released a solo double album. And then yeah, and then the new Night Watch, which just came out in November,
Okay.
and that's been kind of like a sort of a big kind of ongoing project that's just been kind of on and off, and it's been this sort of continuing thing that is. I'm very relieved that it's completed. I'm very happy with how it turned out, and now I'm just kind of shifting focus back to muskox because that's been a little bit dormant for a bit.
hmm
So we just tracked our third record. Um, in the fall, and then our cellist who plays with the band Leprous, he like went on run on the road, so I just kind of wasn't listening to those what we recorded, and now we're sort of like going back to that and trying to finish that up, and so yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to complete things and stay as active as possible. And sometimes it feels like nothing's happening, but then things kind of come in bursts. I find,
Yeah.
yeah,
That no, that sounds great. I guess I'll start by saying I apologize. I wasn't aware of the solo double album, but I'm gonna have to go check that out after we're done
cool.
talking. That would be great. Now, yeah, well, let's shift focus to the Night Watch stuff because obviously that's the most recent and obviously the one you're promoting the most. Um, I listen to it. I really dig it a lot. Um, this may sound kind of I don't know if this is too obvious of a thing, but just based on the name,
Hmm.
the the song titles, everything, I got a very vivid feeling of exploration. Is that
For sure.
does that sound accurate? I didn't want to like make it too simplistic of a give it too
Well, I
simplistic.
mean, the album itself, like, we're not really like trying to be a. I think with this record, it's kind of like I've been, you look at the album art and this sort of, yeah, it's like there is a concept behind the album, and it has to do with an island, kind of like on the cover.
Okay.
So we're not trying to be too discreet about things.
Okay.
I think one thing I sort of like about I think sometimes it's cool to be discreet, but I think sometimes it's cool to say like, okay, we're going on an adventure, and here's what's gonna happen. So yeah, there's definitely the whole record kind of came together as sort of a. It wasn't meant to be a concept album, but we started kind of writing material, and then we were like, oh, this. Our drummer had a piece, the first piece on the album that he wrote, and he's like, oh, it's kind of like a sort of a piratey folk metal song about
Yeah.
like going out onto the ocean, and then like and then there's all this kind of craziness that happens on the boat, and and spirits coming and whatever, and then a big storm and then a shipwreck. And that was like almost 10 years ago. We were working on that, and I was like, oh, cool. So we like that was kind of, you know, a lot of our songs are sort of, we kind of have a little story for it, but then we just kept writing material, and then it was like, oh, like this could be what happens when we get to the island. Like, okay, neat. And then it just kind of happened. Like it's always weird when, because as we were doing it, it was like, oh yeah, this is fun. And then we look back and you realize, oh, okay, now we have a full story and a full concept album that we never really set out to create. But the sense of adventure is actually one of my favorite qualities in music. I think I'm a very big fan of like classic kind of prog rock and, you know, music that can take you somewhere. I think that's a quality that I really like. And with instrumental music, I find you can create sort of the framework, and people can sometimes have their own interpretations of it. And I think that sort of freedom is pretty neat. But you're completely on the button. I mean, yeah, this album was definitely meant to be like a concept album, an adventure where each piece kind of takes you somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And you know, I like what you're talking about when when you're talking about the sense of adventure in terms of, you know, as a prog fan as well, you know, I also love when music has that ability. And the one thing I liked about the Night Watch stuff is that yes, it's an instrumental, but I feel like and again, I don't mean to sound this in a like a pop way or something like that. It's accessible. You know, it's you're able. There's a very strong focus on the melodic aspect. You know, it's not just. I don't feel it's, you know, you guys getting together and, you know, busting out crazy chops for the sake of busting out crazy. You know what I mean? I think instrumental music can sometimes have that that kind of stigma about it, and I think you guys kind of, you know, break through that. Would that be an accurate description as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and that's the thing that I'm really proud of with our band. It's like, you know, if somebody said, "Oh, here's the 70-minute instrumental prog album," they'd probably be like, "Oh my God, like how many friggin' solos are going to be on this thing?" And it's like, I'm actually really proud that like the middle song, which is this not even it's like this little kind of jazzy song where we each kind of take turns doing these sort of fun little solos, like almost in kind of a goofy way. Like that's the only thing. And to me, one thing that I love about what we're able to do is I really am into arrangements. Like for me, I'd rather play a really cool rhythm. That's just my nature. And I think also it's interesting because I think if Evan the violinist was playing a guitar, maybe it would seem more noodly. But since it's a violin, the violin can kind of get away with things because a lot of his quote solos are kind of, they're written like they're not just kind of thrown in. Like we like to kind of write them very melodically. And so yeah, to me, I think that yeah, it's true sometimes with prog or with, you know, instrumental music, because the album is technical, but I think it works. There's a sense of narrative going on, and there's to me the arrangement is the most important thing. And you know, one of my favorite things is when we're each playing something very basic, but then altogether it becomes something really neat where you can see all the moving parts. Where if I were to play the riff by itself, you'd think, okay, that's pretty boring. But then when it locks in with everything else, like that to me is something that we really pay attention to. Like I don't really have a real drive to go past the 12th fret on my guitar. Like it's just, you know, maybe one day, and I love when people can solo well. You know, I just saw Dream Theater recently and like doing Scenes from a Memory live, and that's awesome. You know, like I can appreciate that. But when I'm playing, I think of it, you know, I think, you know, Evan, the violinist, he's from a classical background. I'm from a classical background. Our drummer, he's done musical theater. And so that really kind of comes together where we're really curious about arrangement and how we can like work parts together. And rather than just, okay, now the guitar's soloing again, it's like, I think with the Night Watch, it's needed because everybody sort of blends together where you kind of don't know who's taking the lead sometimes. it's like it's kind of like, oh, you can focus on the drum beat. That's pretty cool. Like, oh, the guitar riff is neat, but
Right.
nobody's
Yeah.
really. We sort of take turns doing that, and I think that that's something that I really, yeah, something we've definitely strived to do is to try to be a prog band, but not in a traditional sense, not trying to just show off our chops, but kind of create something that can, take you forward. And kind of one of our mantras is sort of, I'm always curious how much you can get out of one idea versus putting a bunch of ideas together. Because some of our songs, for 5 minutes, it's the same riff, but like it's heavy, now it's mellow, now it's jazzy, or now it's building up, or now this person's, it's sort of like all these different permutations
Hmm.
rather than kind of hitting you with 100 ideas. It's sort of like one idea kind of just like opening up. So I think as a listener, you're kind of following that opening, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I could see that. Yeah. Um, well, it's when you're discussing it too, we immediately when you said that you don't feel comfortable going beyond the 12th fret, is that a classical guitar thing? Because classical guitars don't necessarily have
Yeah.
the you get kind of confined to that
Hmm.
to that space.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, absolutely. Because like I have a guitar that has like a little cutout, but even still, you're not going to the 24th fret on a classical. So
Right.
I had never really thought of it that way. I think, yeah, I think that may have an influence without even realizing it. But yeah, I think yeah, I don't know. I think when I was like a teenager, I was really into metal, and that's when I sort of picked up the guitar. But then I thought, oh, I'm gonna do some classical to kind of get a foundation, and then I just sort of like stuck with it. And then so what's fun with that is like some of the riffs on the album, like I'll write a finger picking riff and then be like, okay, what would happen if I picked this on the low two strings? Like try to do these patterns, and you kind of end up with sort of neat kind of things. Because I find when I'm playing classical, I'm thinking of the guitar kind of vertically, like I'm looking at all the strings in front of me.
Right.
Whereas I think if you're picking, you're kind of it's I don't know. Yeah, you're a lot of time it's a bit more like lateral movement type of thing, and I think so it might lend itself to writing certain kinds of riffs. But then if you write a finger picking riff where you're jumping over all these strings to try to translate that into a electric riff,
Yeah.
can yield some pretty interesting results.
Hmm.
But I think it's just my personality. Yeah, I think I'm just not that guy. I'm just not the shred guy. Like
Yeah.
I think I want to. I think what I've like even for me, some of my favorite guitarists, like Michael Lakerfeld, like he can rip a beautiful solo, but I'm always I'm more a fan of like songwriting and like and riffs and ideas and kind of versatility.
Hmm.
So like that's kind of more my interest. Not to say it's better than anything else. It's more like I've kind of followed it in this way where I've been able to kind of find the aspects of guitar that I like and then try to fuse them together. And that just hasn't necessarily included like a lot of sweet picking and high stuff.
No, I mean, I feel the same way myself. You know,
Hmm.
um, I mean, Michael Ackerfeld is a great example because I find with listening to Opeth, I'm like you. I'm not necessarily drawn to the solos on it.
Hmm.
I feel like there are a couple moments that are pretty cool, but to me, it's all about, I think I'm like you. I like the arrangement. I like
Hmm. Hmm.
the interplay of the melody and what's behind the melody, and and I think not to harp on the classical thing, but I think even listening to classical guitar music for myself, that's the focus is on everything obviously being played on one instrument for the most part,
Hmm.
but it's about the interplay. It's about where's your melody, what's the part under supporting it, that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
um chords, chords are a big thing for me. Not just hearing the normal power chord stuff, hearing more expressive chords, more expressive things. And I think,
Hmm.
Opeth does that really well. So that makes sense to me. I feel very much the same way.
Hmm. Yeah, and
uh,
like I've
yeah.
I've like I'm really digging the new Tool album, and I think Tool is an interesting example. Like the way they arrange their things is something that I find very satisfying because You've got Adam Jones doing this little kind of like dun, 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 these like little kind of very, very reserved sort of riffs, but then like the way each thing comes together, it becomes its own identity. Like everybody's holding up a different part of the structure. And I find that stuff very, very satisfying and a lot, for me personally, a lot more than kind of, okay, everybody's just doing the same thing and now this person's like, I find it very stimulating. I guess that'd be the best. Like I'm sort of trying to decode what's happening, but everything is, and even the more I listen to the new Tool, I don't know if you've listened to it much, but the more I listen to it, it's like, I'm like, oh, like he's doing that riff later, but like I didn't realize that riff is like happening earlier, but he's like doing it in a different way. And oh, okay, like you see all the invisible threads, like it's like, so when you hear it, you can tell there's more to it, but you can't quite grasp it all. And I think that's what brings you back to certain music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I myself haven't really listened to the new Tool that much, I'll be honest with you, but the way you're describing it, see, I'm the kind of person where, I freely admit when I listen to something that, I may not pick up on certain things, but
Mm-hmm.
that, I'll interpret things the way I interpret them. But I always find that I like when other people, I don't just like people saying, "Hey, you need to check this band out. They're really cool." Like I like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if someone's really passionate about the way they're describing what the band is doing, that
Mm-hmm.
makes me interested to listen to because I want to see that perspective. So hearing that perspective on the new Tool record makes me want to go back and listen to the new Tool
Yeah,
record
no,
because I'm like,
that's great.
that's because I think a lot of people dismiss it. They dismiss it as, oh, they're just playing these boring riffs over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is this like higher logic going on in what they're doing, I think that's something that could make it a much more enjoyable listening experience for people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because when I think about genres of music that influence me, it's it's less about I like defining genres less about like, oh, like prog is technical. I like to
Yeah.
think of it. The thing about prog that drew me to it is like would be I would describe it as detail. Like there's a lot of detail going on. So you have to. It's like looking at a really elaborate painting. You can walk by and glance and oh, I see a big tree. Yeah, okay, or whatever. It's like it's the detail that to me is something that I really like, and that's not limited to prog music. Like that's just a quality of music that I appreciate. That can be in a great pop song. Right
Yeah.
in this thing where it's like you hear the song and you're like, I have no idea what I just heard. I couldn't grasp that. Like there's layers to it that the music kind of invites you to. That's something that I've always really enjoyed, and especially with classical where you know it's those little things, and even with the Night Watch, there's a lot of that on this album, like just little kind of, like for me, one thing that I love about songwriting is like it's not even so much riffs, but like how do you combine like transitions, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
how do you put those to get those two ideas together? And sometimes it can be an abrupt thing and that works, and sometimes it's not that, or it's like yeah, I think that that's really kind of what draws me to it. And back to the new Tool, it's like that's a thing that I really appreciate about that. It's very patient and it's very detailed. And I think with that record, Tool, they have kind of certain, like most bands have certain kind of character traits, right? And I
Hmm.
think Tool, they've sort of they have these kind of certain character traits, and I find that have been expressed in different ways on different albums. And I understand certain people that may not like the new Tool because there's certain character traits that are on other albums that they don't explore on this one. But all the traits that I really love, they do they take it the full length on this record. So to me, I was like, oh, this is like the Tool record for me because I love their more introspective stuff and their more kind of like moody stuff. And that's more this kind of album. Like it has its heavy moments, but it's definitely a lot more in the atmospheric and kind of moody arrangement. It's not as because they have a real kind of sense of like sarcasm, and a bit
Hmm.
of like raunchy humor,
Yep.
and that doesn't really rear its head on this, and I don't really miss that because that's not necessarily what I like about Tool, but I can appreciate when they do it, but I like when they go a little deeper and
Yeah.
they sort of explore things that are, go a little bit deeper in the human experience, and I find that. So for me, when I heard this record, I was like, this is the record for me. Like it has all the things that Tool does that I love in like 5, 10 to 15 minute songs. So I'm like, thank you, sign me up. But if people want the kind of heavier, raunchier, sort of like sarcastic, biting humor of Tool, like you're not really gonna get that. So,
Right. Yeah,
but
I
you
can
can
see
get that
that.
in another record.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, cool. Um, well, and to go back to the Night Watch record, so I like when you're the way you're explaining about how things going on and arrangement and everything like that, because admittedly when I was listening to it and then I was like, geez, I forget how many people are in this band, and
hmm
it's only three. So, I mean, what went into the recording of this? I mean, as a band, how did you go about this? I mean, are you playing everything? Are there guest musicians? What's
Yeah.
going on with this?
At the time of recording, and up to recently, it was a four piece.
Oh, okay, I didn't
Yeah,
realize that.
yeah. So there was myself on guitar, our drummer Dan Malma, violinist Evan Runge, and then our bassist Matt Cowan, who's no longer with us. He's
Oh,
no
okay.
longer in the band; he's still around.
Okay.
But it's been a four piece for all our records, that lineup. But that's a great compliment that it sounds kind of fuller than. Yeah, and I think that's a testament to arrangement as well, because when things sound really full, like it's yeah, it can seem bigger than maybe it actually is when you break it down. So, for this record, like the only kind of extra things we added were um our drummer, he played some grand piano parts.
Okay.
Um and we had some guest vocalists do this kind of barbershop thing on Dance of the Mountain People. And then on the first song we had some haze,
Yeah.
like kind of pirate chanty haze.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I
we
heard
had
that.
like
Yeah.
we had like a big group of us, like nine friends, kind of all come together, and we were all like in a big open room, and we just did those, and then we kind of layered them. But beyond that, I mean, it's and there's we do like layer some violins here and there, and but uh so yeah, when we play live, it is a bit more stripped down because there's only one guitar and stuff. But
Right.
really, yeah, it's not. It was really down to the four of us that kind of put it together, and I think it's interesting because I think sometimes with metal, the tendency is like everyone play the same thing at the same time in the same way, and that gives it a certain thing, and that does work, and we definitely do that. And that can lend itself to sort of some heavier feeling. But I think when everybody's doing a different thing at the same time, it lends a sense of fullness
Hmm.
that I think we explored a lot on this record, and in our past ones as well, but definitely in this one. But I mean, yeah, it was really just the four of us. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, I can understand that metal tendency because I know I have that when if I'm working on things, especially if I'm demoing an idea, I'm, writing a rhythm guitar part, doubling
hmm
it.
hmm
If I write a bass thing to it, because I'm not really a great bass player, I'll just play the guitar riff on the bass if
Sure.
nothing else. Um, but it, it you're right. If done well, having everybody kind of independent of each other, but also unified in a weird
hmm
way, that can really, really help bring a sense of fullness in it. And as a listener, that's the kind of thing I love. I mean, even on
hmm
records that I've known for years, I love going back and listening and hearing something in the inner workings that I never understood or I never perceived,
hmm
the interplay between a bass and the drum or guitar or something, some sort of arrangement thing in there that, again, it allows you to discover new stuff
hmm
and that's pretty awesome. And also you get to hear mistakes that you didn't hear before.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
but when you hear them, you're just kind of like, well, I've always enjoyed this, and it hasn't distracted from my enjoyment, and it kind of has almost enhanced it when you hear these kind of weird mistakes too. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's just again, I think it just comes down to compositional kind of techniques, right? So
mhm.
like I don't, it's finding what the part needs, like in the song Shamaniac, there's this kind of build up part at the end where we kind of revisit the opening
Oh
riff,
yeah, yeah.
and then it's like we're doing the riff, and it's what's interesting is that there's like a 4 minute chunk where Evan is just repeating the main riff, and he takes a full back seat, and so it starts with like, you know okay, so we're doing the riff, and then all of a sudden Dan starts going off in a different direction. I'm still playing the riff, and then the bass goes off in a different direction, and then I start playing the riff differently, and then everything kind of like starts together and then expands outward, and then it's just this kind of cacophony of all these different things still locked together, but then out of that part we go back into the more kind of metal thing where now we're all together, and it's that kind of contrast that gives it the real heaviness, because we're
Hmm.
going from this really expansive thing to just like getting sucked back into like this this vacuum of just like, okay, now we're heavy. And I think it's, to me, those are the fun, that's what I find satisfying in creating. It's finding that balance, right? Because sometimes you need to be all together just chugging away, because that's what needs at that moment. but
Hmm.
then but then like sometimes having something, having the opposite of that just before, like kind of like, Opeth demonstrated, and there's a lot of Opeth worship on this record, right? Like going full heavy to classical guitar, like that's a thing that I've always really loved, and um because it makes the heavy part sound heavier and makes the classical part sound even sweeter.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. And I mean, I love the way you describe stuff. It's
I
you
spend a
may
lot of time thinking about it.
well, I know, I could be the same way when I'm talking about something. I think my wife refers to it as me putting on my professor coat when I, if you ever, go off on some tangent about like, the intricacies of something or
Yeah,
and she's like, "All right, calm down, professor. Let's."
yeah.
But no, I mean, I think it's really cool, and it's again, and it brings back to me just the vibe of the record, which to me, listening to it just as a listener, not knowing some of these details, but
Hmm.
just kind of my own perception of it, it was like, yeah, like there is that vibe. There's this vibe. It's hard to describe, but there is a vibe to the record which kind of put a smile on my face, and
That's awesome.
not that it was all like major key
Hmm.
stuff, but like like I said, it was the sense of adventure kind of vibe that I got from it, and I think
Hmm.
hearing you say that it's a concept album. I mean, I kind of figured that. I think it's harder with um with with instrumental stuff because
Hmm.
you don't. It's not like there's a lyric book telling you like the characters and everything like that. So
Hmm. Yeah,
um
we did we like in the digital booklet, because we haven't printed our physical stuff yet, but there's in the digital booklet, we had
oh, okay.
the person who did the cover art, Alice Duke. She did an image for each song, and then we had the band and some guests write a piece of a writing, like a poem um for each song. So in the actual booklet, and when we actually print the albums, there'll be this as well. There's going to be an image for each song with an accompanying poem that doesn't necessarily tell the story, but it kind of hints at the concepts. And yeah, so which I think, like, I can send that to you, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a
Oh,
deeper sort of thing without giving too much away. But yeah.
well, now I feel silly.
Oh, no, no, no. Well, I only sent you the record with just the cover art,
It's
so
okay.
you
It's
were
okay.
sort of, yeah.
But that's cool though. Yeah, because I was gonna ask you when you know as when you're writing a concept record as a band with say vocals, you 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 do have these lyrical concerns and you have
Hmm.
continuity and stuff like that. When you're
Yeah.
coming at it from the instrumental perspective, what are you looking for to kind of to kind of reinforce the concept, so to speak, while the music's playing? Is it, repetition of themes? Is it,
Hmm.
do you kind of say, okay, well, this is going to be this character's theme, this is going to be this,
Hmm.
what kind of thought process went into that?
Yeah, we were a little less premeditated. That's what was kind of funny about this whole thing was that we just wrote them as songs, and then it was like, oh, this part kind of could be this, and we were sort of like figuring out the story as we kind of went along,
Hmm.
and even now, like we each kind of have our own take. Like we sort of agree generally on what happens, but
Yeah.
we all have our own ideas of like certain moments or even the ending. Like we each kind of we don't actually really know how it ends. We sort of have an idea. We're like, oh yeah, this, and then or then I'll be talking to Dan the drummer, and he's like, no, like I think that this, and I don't know. When we had a little party with some friends to like celebrate the release, and as we were like listening to it, I was sort of doing this kind of narration to it, and even as I was narrating it, I was like, kind of things were revealing themselves that I'd never even thought of before. I was like, oh, this could actually be this, and so it's kind of neat. It's kind of the best of both worlds because I love concept records, so we sort of have that, but then we weren't so bound to like continuity issues
Yeah.
or this and that, so we're kind of free with it, but then so it still has the sense of adventure, but then it's not like it's not as linear, or like there's definitely certain kind of key things that happens, and there is sort of a general theme of the record because there's a shipwreck at the beat on the first song, and then it's kind of like, okay, you're abandoned on this island, and there's this mountain, so you're like, okay, I need to climb the mountain to get higher ground, and then on the mountain you encounter different things, but then also it's kind of a metaphor of like, if you're how do you overcome certain obstacles or like face your own doubt, and so there is a lot of kind of that balance within the record of these kind of just like crushing kind of moments, but then also like some sweet moments, or even some sort of, like you said, like moments that kind of put a smile on your face. Like, I think that we we don't take ourselves too seriously. Like we
Yeah.
take the music very seriously, but also one of our key rules in the jam space is that if there's an idea that makes us laugh, we keep it.
Hmm.
And sometimes it can be just like a goofy cliche thing, but we're like, that's good, like we like that, or it makes us laugh, like it makes us feel happy, and one of the best descriptions, one of my favorite music reviews I've ever read was an Amazon review for this instrumental band called Scale the Summit, who I'm a big fan of and who were a big influence on me when I was writing this record. And I think the reviewer said, it takes me on a journey and it makes me feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that was it. And
Exactly.
I was like, yeah, yeah, that's a pretty like apt thing, like I'd strive for.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get that. And one thing, we probably talked about this in our first talk, but going from the way you compose music for muskox or for your solo stuff as compared to getting into the band dynamic, is it what was that transition like? Did you find it very freeing because you're not the one responsible for everything?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's definitely like with Muskox, because the first EPs and the first album were all me, and so I find that process is doing solo stuff is very nice because it's just you,
Hmm.
and it's also kind of lonely, and it's also kind of difficult because if you're in a bad mood, if you have a riff that you can't figure out, you're kind of stuck because it's just you.
Yeah.
But you do have the freedom to do what you want. So, I've found a way to kind of have different artistic outlets that kind of fulfill a different part of me. So like with Muskox, like with Woodfall and with the new record, the process was I kind of wrote the album on my guitar, and then I gave it to Raf, the cellist, who's a super genius, and he wrote crazy string arrangements because is a he's amazing at that. So I think I could do it, but I'm just like, that way. So it's kind of a meeting of minds in a way. So that, and then like our violinist Evan has to learn Raf's insane arrangements, and then that was Woodfall. And um, so that was kind of that process. And with the new Muskox, it was similar, where like I wrote the album on the guitar and then I gave it to Raph. He wrote string arrangements, but then we spent a bit more time together playing it and sort of tweaking arrangements. Whereas with Woodfall, it was literally like how it's on paper, how it is on paper, we record it. Like there wasn't that much editing. And so with the Night Watch, it's fun because you've got with a band with 4 people, it's fun because you come and you're like, okay, I have a riff. Here's my riff. And then Dan, the drummer, he's a musical genius in my eyes. Like he'll say, oh, why don't you try playing it this way? Or like he'll hear something in it. And so you kind of play hot potato, right? You sort of bounce it around. And then to me, that's really fun because it just it ends up in places that I never would have been able to get to on my own.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I could not have written this album on my own. It's and that to me is really, really satisfying because everybody brings their own kind of their flavor to it. And again, sometimes and you know this in any band, you'll have, there's a certain dynamic to it. And sometimes you're just kind of like banging your head against the wall and then somebody says, oh, try this. Or so I find that the fluidity of composing with the band is very fulfilling. And then, so I don't find it difficult switching. I find it helps actually balance it all out.
Oh, okay.
Because, working on this album, which was just so big and so detailed and the production of it and all this, that now like I'm just working on a solo classical guitar record of like 2-minute interludes.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, I'm going to record these live. Like that's, and so it kind of just feeds into that each kind of outlet sort of feeds into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also do a lot of writing. Like I do a lot of spoken word poetry. And so that sort of like influences it in another way, because then I have an outlet for just my thoughts and my words.
Mm-hmm.
And then the instrumental stuff can just be conceptual or thematic. And so I don't know, to me, for me at least, it's like fine. Everything sort of feeds into the next thing. And it has its own inherent rewards and challenges.
Yeah. I think I remember us talking about the spoken word stuff last time too, now that we're talking again. Things coming back after 5 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so one other thing to talk about, and when you brought up Scale the Summit, brought it up to me, reminded me the music video that just debuted today.
Right.
Um, you know, again, I'll have to watch it a couple times now after having talked with you, but just on the outset, I'm watching it, and when I was watching it, it was like, yeah, the animation is really cool. Like, um, what's the deal?
Yeah. No. Well, like,
That's
so we work.
the stupidest way to put it, but
No, it's the best way to put it. Like, it's like, what's up with this video? Yeah, like it's I don't even really know. No, I can give you I can illuminate a little bit, but basically, the animator Kostin, I think Kostin Shiorianu, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but he's Romanian. He's worked with everyone. Like he's done banners for Roadburn Festival. He did the new Opeth video. He's done Voivod. He's done Emperor stuff. Like I call him the Salvador Dali of metal. Like he's just this prolific genius who just creates whole other worlds. And so I met him in 2011 because I was performing in New York City at his exhibition, his first North American exhibition. And then like in the past 10 years of knowing him, he's just gone on to do insane things. And I've just kept in touch with him. And so I sent him the album and I was like, hey, would you be interested in doing an animated video? Because I'd seen some recent videos that he had done that I really loved. And well, I mean, I love everything that he does. And he was like, yeah, I'm into it. And so I sent him the album and he really loved the album. And so it's kind of funny because basically I sent him the album and I sent him the synopsis of each track within the context of the story. And so it was awesome because he's like, okay, I listened to the album, I read the story stuff, and like I incorporated those things, and then I just threw in my own thing. And so basically, like the ocean, the forest, the mountain, that was me. That was me telling him about the the concept of the album, and then the whole castle thing, that's all him.
Oh,
So
okay.
as I was watching it the first time, I was and like yeah, for like when we talk about the album, it's like, oh yeah, you're on an island, you're climbing a mountain, you blah blah blah, this and that. But then he just added this whole other thing. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like I wish I was a millionaire so I could have him animate all of the songs and then release like
Right.
a film. Like it's yeah, so like that question is almost better suited to him. And but yeah, he just I told him the sort of the adventure concept, and then he just added his own thing that is to me just like mind blowing, like and amazing, and adds a whole other dimension to the story, almost like an alternate universe that I'm like yeah, like I was blown away when I saw it, and he's amazing, and I really appreciate what he did too, because he works with a lot of more traditional metal bands, and so in metal it's a bit more like visceral and kind of aggressive,
Yeah.
um, and what I liked about this is that this is almost one of his most I, he's done other narrative kind of videos. I can send you some links to his other stuff, but this one was it felt really special. Like it felt I don't know, I felt like I don't know, there's something about what he created there that because he's an amazing artist, and he's does incredible work with all these amazing metal bands, but he's a very sensitive person, and like
Yeah.
when you study his art, you really see that it's and I think with metal sometimes sensitivity is kind of pushed to the side a little bit, and I also don't want to sound like I'm just shitting on metal, because like I love metal
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be where I am without it. But again, when you love something, you want to also study it and see the things in it that you think maybe are lacking, and then you can contribute that to the greater sort of pot. And so yeah, he just did such a fantastic job. And even for me, like the more I watched it, there's little details that come up, and what's neat with this sort of short film uh, format is that like there's no context. It's just like here's what happened, and you can fill in the blanks. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that even answers it. I don't even know where he came up with that stuff.
It's all right.
He's amazing. I'm so honored that like I have that to just watch. But I don't know, maybe like by the end of my career when I'm an old man, I'll have like a video for each song. That'll be like my life project to have like the Night Watch An Embarrassment of Riches movie.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, yeah, I think I just got so amazed with the animation that I was like, what's going on? This is awesome. It's
Yeah. And it has that sense of adventure. And I think that, when you said like it puts a smile on your face, like, like again, when I actually think about my big musical influences, like it comes down to, growing up and like watching cartoons, playing video games. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that's really like, I had that revelation like years ago when, not that long ago, maybe like 5 years ago, I was at this video games live concert where it's like they're playing video game music with an orchestra. And I'm watching this concert. I'm thinking, I used to listen to these songs for hours. Like, I don't just put on a song now and then I repeat it for 5 hours or 4 hours. But like when you're a kid playing video games, that's what you're doing.
Mhm.
But you're not thinking that you're listening to the music, but still it's like seeping into your subconscious. And like yeah, and this album to me is like actually it's really funny because recently I was at this like used CD shop and I found this like CD-ROM of an old random like role-playing game that I used to play called King's Quest.
Mhm.
And I like loaded up into my computer, and sure enough it's about a guy who shipwrecks on an island, and and I'm like and I'm watching this, and then it's like the little opening cinematic thing, and it's like him on a boat, and then it's like him looking through his telescope, and he's just like land ho, and I was like, oh my God, like it's like, oh yeah, that's where this is all coming from.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just funny. But I think that sense of adventure, like that thing I think we all have that, maybe as children, obviously it's maybe a bit more rooted or something, and as adults maybe we forget it. But I think that to me is like how I try to sort of view life, because it is this sort of like adventure in the unknown that we're all kind of participating in, and that has a lot of ups and downs and different kind of things. And so yeah, that's kind of, I don't know, I feel like that video really captures that, and it has sort
Yeah.
of an innocence and again a sensitivity that I think is how, I don't know, it's how we connect to art, like when it kind of reaches us on that level.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny you brought up the thing about the video game thing because that's something, it's a similar thought that I was thinking a while ago, which was, I think it was sort of the same thing as you. I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm hearing these, bands playing because that seems to be a kind of a big thing now is metal
hmm
bands covering video game music, and there's so many of them now.
hmm
But yeah, it's just like when you listen to, I mean, for me, it was more of the old Nintendo games. That was my generation.
Yeah.
But the hearing, if I hear people play like the Legend of Zelda theme song, or Castlevania, or any of those kind of classic, even the Super Mario Brothers ones, it's kind
hmm
of like, yeah, you're right. I've This song was pounded into my brain for however
Yeah.
many hours I played this this thing, but I was so focused on what my task in the video game was that it never dawned on me that yeah, this melody is there. And even if I've forgotten what it was like, if I've forgotten, how I perceived the game as a kid, it's like hearing those triggers something.
Oh yeah.
It triggers something in your brain, which like for me, like actually one of the, I think it's actually kind of a messed up memory. Like I don't mean messed up like bad. I just mean more like I'm mixing up different things. But I remember the very first time I heard YYZ by Rush. Um, that like one of the melodies they do like a or I forget
hmm
which whatever one it is, like the way that it's produced and everything. I was like, oh, this reminds me of the DuckTales video game.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
granted, it came
yeah.
out it came out way before the DuckTales video game, but it made me think of that because it brought back a vibe in my head, which reminded me of what it was like to play that video game. So
Yeah.
yeah, I completely agree with you, that yeah, it's like these things kind of seep into your brain, and you know, and yeah, hearing them is just like, oh wow. So
Yeah,
so
well, it's visceral. Like I found this book of Nintendo songs, like Mario songs, and another book of Zelda songs arranged for solo classical guitar. I found it on whatever, on Amazon or something, and I got it and I was playing these songs, and like I can only describe it as visceral, like the emotion that I'm feeling from this music. I'm like, this is, I don't know, like I'm like, this music is just represents such a deep, it was such a
yeah.
deep part of me, and then the memories of like playing the game or what was happening in my life at the time of the game. And yeah, and it's funny because even like uh I for some reason I've got really into like smooth jazz, just like this kind of cheesy sort of like smooth melodic jazz from like the kind of the 80s,
Yep.
and I'm listening to this stuff, and like my girlfriend kind of makes fun of me. She's like, "Why are you like?" She doesn't like it as much, and I'm just like, and I like it because I'm like, it's like it knows that it's cheesy, and it's like okay with that,
Yeah.
It's like, because that's the goal. It's like, how can we be as smooth as possible, and like you can't be like ironic and smooth, like, oh, I'm gonna, it's like you can't be. You have to just like go for it, and in the same way that like if you're doing metal or like power metal or like I love metal because it is so hard on your sleeve. Like it's like if you're gonna sing about the end of the world or like humanity's failings, like you can't do it halfway, right?
Right.
If you're gonna do a metal song about a dragon, like I need you to go 100%.
Yeah.
I need the booklet to have maps. I need to go all in, And so I was listening to all this smooth jazz, and again, there's something about, I don't know how to, my taste is defined a lot by, I don't know if obvious is the right word, but I like music that knows what it's trying to give you, or
Hmm.
is that it's obvious. Like again, subtlety for sure, but there's something about like, okay, here, like again, we're going on an adventure. Here's where we're going, right? Like it's like, okay, I'm down for that, right? And so I find like even things like smooth jazz, or I got really into like late '80s new age music, um, because, and I was thinking like why am I digging this music so much? And then it's like the video game thing. I'm like, oh yeah, like when I was a kid, in the 80s and I was going to like grocery stores with my mom, like this is probably what I was hearing like
You're right.
nonstop, right?
Oh yeah.
And then like the smooth jazz thing, it's like when I was watching, golden era of like sitcoms in the 90s, it's like it makes me think of like a sitcom.
Oh yeah.
It gives me that feeling of like, oh, okay, like something, it has that kind of sense of humor that like it immediately puts you somewhere, and it gives you like a real sense of place. And you're talking about Rush. You know the song Villa
Oh
Strangiato?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you know the melody, da, 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 da,
Yeah.
da, da. Yeah. Do you know where that melody came from?
Um, off the top of my head, no, but
Yeah, it's funny because I could sing that melody to anyone and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I've heard that." Because it's one of these melodies that is sort of like in our DNA, but we don't know where it came from in
yeah,
a way.
it's like I before you go further, and it's like yeah, like I hear like the big band kind of
Hmm.
vibe to it. So like, where does it come from?
Yeah, so it was my guitar teacher a few years ago was he was talking to me about he was playing me some music that he wrote. He's like, "Oh yeah, it's kind of like cartoon music, kind of like Raymond Scott." And I was like, "Oh, who's Raymond Scott?" And he's like, "Oh, he gave me this record of like people playing Raymond Scott music." And so Raymond Scott was a jazz composer in the late 30s and into the 40s and 50s. And then in the 60s he like invented synthesizers and he's a crazy, I call him the Tesla of music. Like he's this
Right.
super genius guy. He's like this inventor, but then he was writing jazz music. And so basically he wrote when he was doing jazz music, his brother was like the director of this CBS like orchestra. And then his brother was like, he wanted to be an engineer, but his brother was like, "Oh, you should go into jazz music." So he like studied at Juilliard before it was Juilliard. And then he was doing all this jazz music and he wasn't really into it so much. He was like, "I want to write my own music." And he's like, "I want to write my own music that people like the first time they hear it." And so basically he had this jazz quintet and that melody is his music. And the reason why we know it is because Warner Brothers bought the rights to his music at that era. And so the music director at Warner Brothers, his name is Carl Stalling, he was sampling Raymond Scott all over Looney Tunes.
Oh, okay.
So that melody has been used in Looney Tunes tons of times. Like you can, and it's called Powerhouse. So if you go on YouTube and you look up Powerhouse Raymond Scott, you'll see like Looney Tunes conveyor belt thing. And so Raymond Scott basically was writing this like super super intricate but on the surface kind of whimsical jazz music, but he was structuring it like classical music. Like it was completely composed. There was like very few like there wasn't really any improvising.
Hmm.
And his stuff is insane. It's some of my favorite music. It's I don't know how to describe it. Like when you hear it, it sounds like cartoon music, but he wasn't
Yeah.
even writing it for cartoons. He was just writing it for himself.
Wow.
And then the other little twist is that John Williams, the film composer who did the Star Wars theme and Jurassic Park and all that, his dad was the drummer in Raymond Scott's quintet.
Oh, okay.
So when you hear like the Cantina theme for Star Wars, that's like it's kind of like that's a Raymond Scott kind of
Oh.
reference.
Oh, okay. See, you're putting a name to something, and when you first asked me, for some reason I was like, oh, I think I've heard that, but now that you're describing it, I haven't heard that. But but when I hear that melody in La Villa Strangiato, I instantly get a feeling of familiarity with it.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
the
because you've heard it.
right, and without knowing, and now that you're telling me that, you know what I'm going to do as soon as I get off the phone with you is I'm going to go go look up
Yeah.
this Raymond Scott stuff because that's
Oh my
awesome.
goodness. His stuff is, and again, when you hear it, it's gonna give you that feeling of like it sounds like cartoon music.
Mhm.
And so it's like, but again, it's back to the thing I was saying about metal, where it's like, it's I don't know if hard on your sleeve music, but it's like, it's it has this, it is kind of obvious. Like even his song titles, he has a song, it's like Reckless Night on an Ocean Liner, or like the Penguin, or they're all kind of these sort of goofy little titles, but the
Mhm.
music is very serious. But what I realized is like video game music, when I got into Raymond Scott, I was realized like, oh wow, like all the cartoons I watched as a kid, like that's deep in my musical DNA, and like now I know kind of where it came from. And same with the video game stuff, or like the new age stuff, or like I'm a very big fan of like thematic music,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, if you're gonna, that's why when I look into like, okay, if I'm gonna listen to smooth jazz, it's like there's a lot of bad smooth jazz, just like there's a lot of
Oh yeah.
bad anything, right? But it's like, who does the best smooth jazz, right? And then like I discovered this guy Bob James, and he did the theme for the TV show Taxi
Okay.
with Andy Kaufman
Oh yeah. Danny
and yeah,
DeVito.
yeah.
Yeah. Judd Hirsch. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's like Bob James, this like really famous smooth jazz guy, like he did the music for Taxi. So I'm like, oh yeah, like that was a bit before my time, but like that. But then watching like sitcoms and that kind of thing, like and even like Disney movies, like as a kid, you're like taking in all that kind of, like I don't know. I find that stuff very, very interesting. But Raymond Scott, like, yeah, his stuff is insane. And then he was partly responsible for inventing kind of synthesizer and electronic music.
Oh,
That's like
okay.
a whole other chapter of his career. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing when you hear about these guys who had such a profound impact on you, or not even just on you, but just on music in general, but they're kind of lost to time. Like
Hmm.
because I had never heard of them until you're just talking about them right now. But
Yeah.
the way you're describing it, it's like, well, without him, I wouldn't have a lot of things. Like
Hmm.
certain things wouldn't have progressed the way they did, and it's interesting to hear about that. Um, and I know when you were talking about New Age too. A friend of mine found for me. There's this. Figures as a good time as any to talk about it. There's this YouTube channel, I believe it's called Sounds of the Dawn,
Okay.
and what it is it's some guy, he collects old New Age cassettes, like very
Mm.
rarely out of print, and basically digitizes them and puts them out on there so you can like listen to these forgotten
Hmm.
new age albums from the 70s and the 80s and stuff like that that were just like on cassette and everything like that. So that's pretty cool. It's a pretty interesting little thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's awesome. And like Dan the drummer, he was working at a it's kind of just like a used sort of secondhand shop where they just got all kinds of random stuff. And so he would just when he'd get like a box of albums. So it's like if he found random stuff, like he'd tell me about it, and then it would just kind of if he found like an album with like all of the new age albums are the same. It's like a square image of like nature with just like
Yep.
solid white around it,
Yep.
like which is also the way that I did my solo double album. And so he started bringing these albums, and then I started researching these people, and I was just and again, it's like, and then so I'm always like digging in the dollar bins and like the 25-cent bins, and I found some like insane albums because new age is just like anything, like it's there's a lot of stuff that isn't that great. It's like, so then when you find the great stuff, you're like, why is this so great? And also within that era, the great thing about new age too is that it's not really one thing, like new age was basic in my mind. New age was basically when ambient music met all other music. So it's like new age was like, Kenny G or whatever, or like jazz, but it's like a little mellow, or like folk music, but it's like atmospheric, or classical music, but like not so intense. Like or world music, but like mellow. Like it's kind of like when everything mellowed out a little bit,
Yeah.
and but it's still difficult to pull off. Like I discovered this one album just for like a dollar, this Japanese album, and again you look at it and it's like Zen Garden, and you're like, okay, like I know what I'm gonna get out of this, right? And
Hmm.
so and like with new age music, digging for new age, it's like this is either the greatest thing I've ever heard or the worst thing I've ever heard. Like it's like it's either like really bad or like amazing. And so I check it out, and it's like it's one of the best albums I own. It's this incredible like traditional Japanese but like ambient album. And then I researched the guy who's the main composer, and he's done music for like Memoirs of a Geisha. He's like a Hollywood guy
Oh
who did
wow.
music for like the Ninja Turtles when they're samurais. Like he's like this legit Hollywood dude who did this kind of small new age album on a sort of a underground Canadian label, and it's insane.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm just like,
That's
whoa.
um well, as we're winding down and everything, I guess to go back to to you.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm
No, no.
talking about other
Oh,
things.
I love it. I mean, I love the tangents that people go on. That's kind of why what I encourage
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I find that interesting because I like hearing about people's experiences, people, the stuff people are passionate about.
Hmm.
And like I said, you have a genuine enthusiasm with the way you describe things. I'm like, yeah, just recommend me stuff all day because it's amazing,
Sure, sure.
you
Yeah,
know.
I'll send you a few things. Yeah.
But in terms of the Night Watch, so do you have any big live plans coming up to support this new record?
At the moment, we don't. We've spent most of our money to actually make that record,
Yeah.
but and within as the album was getting released, we parted ways with our bass player, so we're sort of just kind of in a restructuring phase. We've never done we've done a lot of live shows kind of regionally,
Hmm.
but our sort of approach from the beginning was kind of just to make records. I think not intentionally, but it just kind of turned out that way. It was like, oh, let's make a record, and then we'll play some shows, but then it's like, let's make another record. Like for me, um, I love playing live, and I have some touring experience, not a ton, but I've done some tours, and I think in my mind, I've always kind of looked at like, like I'm a big Agalloch fan, and I'm always curious about, because I think in music there's um there's these ideas of like, okay, you do it this way and you'll get this result. And the thing I love about music is that there's no guarantees of how things are going to work. There's always anomalies within the whole structure. And so, certain bands, they've just they just put out records and never toured. And then by the time they toured, they had a following because of the great records they made.
Oh yeah, yep.
And so it's like, if I had the choice between doing 10 tours and doing 10 records, I might lean towards just making 10 records
Yeah.
versus like playing one record for 3 years or whatever. And it's not to say that everyone has their own kind of thing. Um, but I think that like, I don't know, like right now, this record is getting some good press and it's sort of like getting the name out there. And so I feel like if now, when like the next time we actually decide to go to play live, like I think there might be some people who saw a review or heard a thing, and um, that's always kind of been my approach. My approach was always like, just make as many records as you can, and like hopefully people like it, and if they like it, go play for them. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Hmm.
But and I realized that like sometimes you got to go to play to meet the fans, and but it's just kind of been the path of this band. It's been this kind of slow unfolding, and um, so right now there's no like kind of big live plans, but I think that like, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. We'll kind of see what happens. Like
Right.
I feel like I feel like a lot of people are maybe discovering us with this record,
Hmm.
and so, but also like part of my vision with what I'm doing is trying to find a way to combine forces with the projects that I have,
Okay.
because Muskox is the one that I think has the biggest following, and so yeah, like, so finding ways to maybe do a combined thing where like we can do a Night Watch Muskox thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Or like, the cellist in Muskox has a bunch of amazing projects solo,
Yep.
and he has a project called The Visit,
Yep.
and a project called Camoncello, and so it's like, my dream is to do a Visit Muskox Night Watch tour,
Yeah, that would be
like that
amazing.
kind of thing where we can like bring all, and so I feel like it's been about my first record, my first Muskox record, which is I guess my first like proper record, came out like 10 years ago. And so for the past 10 years, it's been a lot of just kind of creating and trying to improve and build my craft and try to build a following. And yeah, and so now I'm starting to kind of think like, okay, how's it gonna, what's the next step in terms of touring? Because also like being a Canadian band, like touring Canada is like difficult because there's very few cities and it's very expensive. And in the States, like, again, if I was in the States and, I could go to this city here and this city there and there's a bunch of people, that's a bit different. It's like Canada is a bit tricky, like, so I've done some things in the States, but that's hard because like
Right.
it's tricky to do shows in the States. So as of right now, yeah, there's no live plans. The next step for us is I think we're just going to do a vinyl release for the
Oh,
for
okay.
the album, and then we have like another bunch of songs ready to go. So I think like within the next few years, I'm gonna try to figure out touring and try to. I just want to do it. I've always wanted. I just want to make sure that I do it right, and I don't like just go and burn myself out and lose a bunch of money and
Yeah.
get sad. Like I want to find a way that, and maybe that's part of it, but I just want to find a way to, you know, to do it that makes sense.
Hmm.
And ultimately, like, I just want to keep making records too. Like, so,
Okay.
yeah.
That's awesome. Well, hey, I'm glad we had the chance to talk. I mean, like I said, you're always a joy to talk to, man. I mean,
Thanks.
it's it's a lot of fun. I'm really happy that you've made a ton of records since the last time we talked. And yeah, man, I really enjoyed the new Night Watch, and now I'm gonna go back and listen to your solo stuff and the other stuff I missed. And
Cool. Thank you.
and
I did. Yeah.
so yeah, it was really great like talking to you.
Thanks, man. And is it okay if I ask you a question?
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Because when I opened for Toby Driver when he was in town,
Yep.
and we were talking, and then he was telling me that you were doing music for a wrestling league.
Yeah, yes I
Yeah. I was
um
checking that out. I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about
oh
that.
sure, yeah, no no, look, I didn't start this podcast to talk about myself.
No,
Um
that's cool.
no, I'm joking. I love talking about myself. What am I talking about? No, yeah. So yeah, I've been a lifelong wrestling fan myself. Speaking of things you're into as a kid,
Hmm.
and so yeah, so a friend of mine started up his own independent wrestling federation a few years ago, and just on a whim, I just kind of said, "Hey man, if you need original music for your wrestlers, let me know." And not realizing, or I shouldn't say not realizing, but I guess I wasn't sure how it worked on the independent wrestling federation level.
Hmm.
And he's just like, "Oh yeah," so he got, he was just like, "Oh, can you write a theme song for our brand, basically?"
Hmm.
And so he's like, "We want it to sound like '80s Georgia professional." It was very specific.
Sure.
He's like '80s Georgia professional wrestling. I think he even said like a specific year too. He's like from 1982. I was like, all right. And
Wow.
it was this kind of, Giorgio Moroder kind of vibe.
Hmm.
Surprisingly, a lot of Giorgio Moroder's stuff showed up in a lot of wrestling federations for some strange reason. But
I don't know him.
so he did. I mean, he's like another kind of synth electronic guy. But if you listen to it, I've actually never seen the movie, but the movie Midnight Express from the 70s, I believe it was from.
Okay, no, I have not seen it.
Um, so I bet you probably have heard this. And there's a song on it called "The Chase," and it's like, yeah, it's just like, I know like a bunch of wrestlers used it. There was actually a tag team in the '80s called the Midnight Express, and that was their theme song. So
Okay.
so he's like, yeah, this is what we kind of want for it, and so I did, and then it just got to the point where I was like, okay, well, let's do more themes for people, and so yeah, so it's just oh, this guy needs a theme song, and well, what's his character like, and okay, he needs this, you know what I mean, like,
Yeah,
so
that's amazing.
so yeah, it was for me, it was a good excuse to really use, because I had just redid my home studio, or upgraded it the previous summer, and it gave me a good reason to upgrade it a little bit more, and kind of explore things, because I am like really, it takes me a while to finish music. Like, I've got so much unfinished music, and
Gotta
that,
finish it.
yeah.
It'll make you feel so good.
And
And sometimes it's closer to being finished than you think it is.
yeah, and so what the wrestling music got me is it definitely got me to think simpler, because you're talking about, you're writing music for a guy who's walking probably for about a minute and a half to 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So really, you're just trying to write a strong 2-minute piece of music.
Which is
Uh,
not easy.
no, it's sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. You're right,
Hmm.
and so it's like, really, you're thinking, okay, well, I got basically two riffs per song, kind of a deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it really kind of focused me, and got me a chance to experiment with things I never usually like genres I never really would experiment with. And
Hmm.
I've written. I can now say I'm a rap producer because
Nice.
a wrestler got me to write this rap theme, and then he rapped over it and released it. And so it's like,
Wow.
so it's my music with his
Yeah.
rapping, and it's
Nice.
you
That's
know,
amazing.
yeah, it allowed me to kind of experiment and find out what's trap music. Um,
Hmm.
and it really got me a good exposure in terms of like, or I shouldn't say exposure, but it gave me a good knowledge. I was able to learn more about some of the synth programs that I use, and I'm still not great with it. Like, I'm really not like very technically like it's like technology scares me. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. Me too.
I love it, but it's hard for me to do. Like you talk about people who can program all sorts of MIDI crap and everything. I'm terrible at it.
Yeah, yeah.
But like for instance, there's this one group of guys are like, well, one of them is a Greek guy, so they wanted again like kind of a rap kind of theme, but they wanted it to have like a Greek feel to it. So I found a Bazooki app
Hmm.
because I don't own a Bazooki, unfortunately,
Yeah.
and I got to learn how to program a Bazooki line and things like that. And one guy I wanted was like this preppy guy and they're like, oh, we hear like yacht rock for him, and
Okay.
so I was like, well, what's a big component of yacht rock? I was like, well, saxophones. And
Hmm.
again, because I'm doing this all myself, so like
Right, right.
everything, if it's not guitar, it has or bass, it has to be programmed because like
Yeah.
I don't have the ability to record drums and or anything else. So so trying to find like a good programmable saxophone, and I found this thing called it's a plugin called Sensual Sax, and it's literally like a fairly basic saxophone sample, but there's a big knob in the middle called the sex knob. And as you turn the sex knob up, it adds vibrato, reverb, and
Wow.
other kind of variations or techniques or whatever. And so you can make a sax line that sounds super bombastic and over the top. So I was able to use that on a track, and
Did you call that song "Turn the Sex Knob Up"?
no, I didn't, but it was kind of funny because they're like, oh, one of the big parts of his character, he's in a gated community. So like I started the track with the sound of a gate being closed, being like, you're not allowed in, you know,
That's
just like,
hilarious.
yeah, just stupid stuff like that. So,
But it's
uh,
fun because yeah, like, and it's that old saying where sometimes limits enhance creativity because it's like you're working within not only just a musically like structured thing framework, but like also thematically like very very. Now
hmm
I'm not going to say limited, but like very defined.
yeah,
So fine, and sometimes that is like okay, so now I don't have to. Already that kind of gives you a starting point,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun, man. And I don't work for that company anymore. I did about 40 themes for them over the course of three
Jeez, that's
years.
amazing.
Not all of them have been released yet, so
There's a band camp though, right?
there is a Bandcamp, and I put out I've released 20 of them as a CD.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I'll yeah, so I did that, and but but I have probably about another 20 more. And the thing is, the funny thing about it is because we were running events every month, it's like they're like, okay, this guy needs something, and so I would come up with something, and it would be like time constraints. Like
Mm-hmm.
I almost always was working on music up until the point I left to go to the live show to run the live audio,
Oh
and
wow.
and as a result, I've got a lot of themes that are I call them show ready, but not release ready because
Okay.
in a show, you don't need to have the full
Mix or
thing,
whatever.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's only playing for a little bit. But for listening, I really wanted to be mastered a little bit better, or
Mm-hmm.
um, I want to add some instruments that aren't there. And there's a couple ones where I wanted, again, it's like things change so quickly. It's like I was like this one guy, I wrote a theme for him. I really loved it, and I'm like, I really want there to be vocals on it, and I'm terrible at singing, so it's like trying to coordinate a guest singer,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
between the time and now that guy no longer works for that company, so it's too late. So it's like there's all these unrealized ideas plus,
Sure,
you
sure,
you
sure.
know.
But wow, that's and how many people were at these events?
The live events are about 200, typically a little less than
What
that
was
maybe.
it? What was it like the first time you like dropped your song and you saw the wrestler come out to it?
Oh, it was awesome. I think it was amazing. And actually, the very first show, I wasn't working live, the live sound. I was just in the audience, and I remember when like I would play a bad guy's theme song, and he would come to the ring, and people would be booing him. They'd be like, "Your music sucks," and I was like, that is the greatest compliment you could give me. It's like, because when you're a bad guy wrestler, you want them to tell you that you suck. You want them to
Yeah.
boo you. It's what makes you feel like your character's working right. So if it's a bad guy, I want people to boo the music. If they're a good guy, I want people to sing along with the music, and I've gotten that a couple times. So that is probably the highest compliment is when I see people singing my theme song, um, which is really cool. And so yeah, it was definitely an amazing experience. And it gave me a kind of a behind the scenes look at the wrestling business, which is uh, very interesting.
Mm. Yeah.
It's totally different than the music. It's similar to indie music, but also very different in various ways. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so it was
Because people are actually making money.
not well, not
Some
really,
people.
not all of them. A
Yeah.
lot of them have,
More people get injured, maybe.
yeah, yeah, lots of it, yeah, injuries. It's like anything else.
Hmm.
There's drama, but I mean, but these guys, it's like it's because it's not like if you're signed to the WWE, you're signed to them exclusively, and so your travel schedule is around their travel schedule. But some of these
Hmm.
guys book themselves like they basically work during the week, and then the weekend is when all the indie wrestling shows happen. So they book themselves
Right.
for like three, sometimes four events over the course of 3 days. So sometimes they're working a double shift, and they'll just like get in a car with four other guys, and they'll drive to where the wrestling
Damn.
event is. And even if they're not on the card, they'll drive themselves there and just like show up. They'll have their gear with them just in case, and then they'll help out in setting up to try. And sometimes you never know. Like the guy will be like, "Well, so and so canceled. We need somebody to wrestle in this match. You're here. You helped out. You do it." You know what I mean? And sometimes
Wow.
it's bizarre. Like I would never grab my guitar and like just show up at a bar and be like, "Oh, do you guys need a musician for tonight?" You know what I mean? Like you never think to
Yeah.
do that. But for wrestling, that's just the way it is. And
Wow.
and guys work hard. And so yeah, but yeah, wrestling music was definitely a big dream of mine as a kid because I loved wrestling music as a kid, and so it was definitely a lot of fun. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, because I grew up watching, because I was born in '85, so kind of early '90s, like
Yep.
Undertaker, Yokozuna,
Yep.
Papa Shango, and all
Oh yeah.
those. Uh, yeah, so all that era, the Legion of Doom.
hmm
Like I had the action figures, and yeah, me and my friend across the street when we were like, I don't even know, like 6 or 7, we'd just like be like wrestling his pillows, just like body
Yep.
slamming them and stuff.
Same man. Same thing, man. Yeah, that's what you did as kids. Like it was the same thing for us, and
Yeah.
and they had to be like, look, don't try this at home, you idiots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh no, I have
You know.
so much respect for those guys. Like,
Yeah.
like I mean, I watched some UFC as well, and like the professional fighting. I'm like, man, my hat's off. Like, and I'm also a big skateboarding fan. And again, it's like just physically dangerous
Yeah.
activities that are
Yeah.
like very entertaining to casually watch.
Yeah.
Like I skateboarded growing up, so I took my broken bones. But yeah, the professional fighting game, I'm like, oh, like yeah, I have a lot of respect for those guys and wrestlers and all of that. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
and you know, and being around them like made me respect it even more because it's part of the deal is they set up the ring themselves. It's kind of a thing, and when
mm,
you actually see what a wrestling ring is made of, you think twice about, when you see guys jumping off the top rope and landing on their back or on their face or
yeah,
on their
yeah,
knee, because that
yeah,
thing, it's wood. It's
yeah,
with a thin layer of foam of padding on top. So no matter what
yeah,
you do, that thing is gonna hurt like crazy.
yeah,
So it's, the same way we have calluses on our fingertips. Like literally, they have calluses
yeah,
on their back. Their backs and they
yeah,
get calloused so that they can absorb the punishment without actually damaging themselves. It's or not damaging themselves that much. I should rather
yeah,
say.
yeah.
But yeah, it was yeah. Thanks for asking. It was it's a cool thing, and and I'm still working, still trying to, I'm just putting my name out there with other places and trying to see if I can get another gig or two out of it. So we'll
Cool.
we'll we'll see.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, no, no
Yeah.
problem. Yeah, I find
Um,
out like one of my like we were talking about yeah, you're talking about wrestling. Like for me, one of my goals or my dreams is to score a video game.
oh yeah,
Because that's what like that's what I've grew up doing and then I love that music. So yeah, I've just been kind of casually looking at kind of indie video game developers like in the city, and so I'm gonna yeah I it's funny because I find having done a lot of my own music for the past decade, I'm sort of wanting somebody to tell me to do a specific thing in a time frame.
yeah. Oh
Like
yeah, yeah,
it's like I'm almost like wanting that, and then I'm sure once I get it, I'll want to go back to my own thing. But it's like, yeah, yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, yeah. Deadlines, man, they help.
Yeah, I mean, they don't give you a choice, right?
Yeah,
So.
exactly. But yeah, yeah. Hey, man, it was like I said, awesome talking to you, and you know, I wish you all the best with everything. I can't wait to hear the new Muskox and whatever else you got going on.
Yeah, yeah, I'll reach out. Yeah, I think the new Muskox, it's looking like we'll be releasing it probably like next fall.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, yeah, and then I mean, it seemed like yeah, the cellist for Muskox, he's releasing a solo record
okay.
next month.
I've seen all the stuff he's been up to.
Okay, cool.
Like I've
Yeah,
seen,
yeah.
I don't know if I've had a chance to check it all out, but yeah, I've seen. I'm like, good for you, man.
Well, if you want, yeah, if you wanted to chat with him for the podcast for his new album, he'd be more than happy to.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think he
Because I
added
don't
me
think
on
he's
Facebook, so
okay.
I think
Cool.
I'll reach out to him and see. Yeah, because
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I
for
said,
sure. Like, yeah.
it's so tough it was tough for me finding guests for a while, so that's why I kind of released the podcast sporadically.
Okay.
But I'd love to do it more often, and I'm trying to again between working and
Hmm.
having a band, but then also having side projects and having all that. It's just a matter
For
of
sure.
spinning like 3,000 plates at once, and
Yeah,
I would love to hopefully every year I say 2019 is going to be my year. So I'm
yeah.
telling you, 2020 is going to be my year, and we'll talk again next December and see if
Yeah, yeah,
see
yeah.
if it pans out or if I'm like really despondent. You'll know why.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, yeah, it's just the sacrifice, like, because when you do one thing, there's another thing that takes a hit, and so it's
Yep.
like finding the balance where you can do the things you want to do well
Hmm.
without like, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's the joy of life. It's the
It is.
adventure.
It is. Well, I'll let you go. But again, thanks for talking to me or
Yeah, thank you.
talking me into talking to you. Not that it took convincing, but I was it's always good I love I've enjoyed a lot of the people I've met throughout the years, and so I know we haven't had a chance to meet in person yet, but hopefully we'll meet up at some point. But it's cool to
Yeah,
see somebody doing really cool music, and really, I enjoy it. I enjoy seeing the different successes, maybe not financial, but enjoy the
yeah.
different successes I see you getting, man. So
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I think yeah, art is weird because especially in this climate because you're when I started releasing records it was like, there was no social media, so you weren't as wrapped up in other people's things.
Yep.
So it's like it's finding that yeah, it's like finding the balance of just like not getting sidelined or like getting critical of yourself, you know, for or comparing yourself with someone,
Yep.
and just kind of like being like, okay, like what is it that I genuinely want to do, and allowing yourself to have a vision, because even though everything is fast right now, doing something well is never going to be that. It's always going to take time. You
Yep.
know what I mean? Like that's just the nature of it. So that's never going to change, you know? So it's like allowing yourself to remember, oh yeah, like this thing will take a certain amount of time, you know? Like we first jammed on the first Night Watch song on this album in 2011.
Yeah.
You know what I
Okay.
mean? And so it's not like we spent 9 years or whatever, 8 years every week working on it, but it was just a thing that unfolded, and for it to go from writing to completion, and recorded and released, it was like that's how long it took, you know. And
Yeah.
it's like that's just, you know, and so you got to just give yourself time.
Yeah. Cool. Well, hopefully I'll have more stuff to share with you.
Yeah, and so, yeah, send me the links to the wrestling stuff, and I'll send you some new age smooth jazz
All right.
cartoon music.
All right. Sounds good, man.
Cool.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
All
See ya.
right. Bye.
do do do.